Hi, good morning, everyone. We're going to give it a minute and let folks start to uh, join the webinar. So just a minute, but in the meantime, my name is Leah Adrian. I am part of the stakeholder and community engagement group here at Austin Development Services. So thank you all for joining us. As folks join in, I'll talk about the info series. That's what we're doing today. But this series, it's designed with our community in mind. It's about connecting all the members of the Austin area with helpful information and practical tips and insights about the services that Development Services provides. In other presentations, we also have folks from other departments join us and talk about things. So we've covered topics like building under the home amendments and spring cleaning and home maintenance tips. We've also done things like landscape design and using Austin's development data and homestead permits, etc. So each session is about helping homeowners and community members feel more informed and empowered. So welcome. We are joined today by our subject matter experts here within Development Services, and they're going to talk about the hoarding and acquiring. But first, let's talk about just in general today's format. We are going to have a presentation and followed by a Q&A at the end. We are also going to have periods where you can participate. And so with those, if you're asked a question and want to participate, you can use the chat function to answer questions that Kristen may bring up. You're welcome to do that. If you have a question throughout the presentation or during the Q&A itself, please use the Q&A function, and I'll remind you about that too. But if you have a question that you'd like to ask, if you put it in the Q&A, one, it captures it for everybody to be able to, for us to be able to answer it and to share later when we have the Q&A session. But you're welcome to use that function throughout, and it'll capture everything and we'll answer it. And that's just better to help us keep on track. But our department, again, we are here to help the community navigate and process local regulations to help build a safe environment within the city. And we support homeowners, we support leasers, business owners, and contractors. So we have a lot of reach out in the community, and we love to be able to bring resources that we have because we're here to serve you. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Mata and Kristen Metz, and they are here to talk about hoarding. So, with that, there you go. It's all yours.
Thank you, Leah. Hi, I'm Kristen. So I'm a master's student currently at UT studying social work, and I've been doing my internship with DSD with Scott Mata. Scott, if you would like to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Mata. I'm a LMSW here with DSD, with the Stakeholder Community Engagement. Been with the department for about 3 years and the first social worker with the department. With my time here, we've identified hoarding as a big need of the community, and that's one of the things we tried to help address, right? Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, so this presentation, it's about hoarding and acquiring. Hoarding and acquiring can be a pretty complex experience. It can be very different for individuals, but we're really interested to see kind of what y'all's experience is with hoarding and acquiring. So if you want to engage in the chat and just put any experience you have maybe with a family member, neighbors that you may have encountered hoarding behaviors or hoarding, or even if you just have any experience just seeing hoarding in the media, just kind of to give us an overview of what y'all know about hoarding, and so we can know where y'all are at as well. Okay, yeah, I'll And then, yeah, and so while y'all are dropping that in the chat, I'll kind of go a bit more into our experience with hoarding and acquiring. So, Scott and I, we work with the code department. They'll generally refer cases to us with any code cases they have. And a lot of times, what that looks like is hoarding and acquiring. We'll go and visit clients at their houses and we do risk assessments. We get to meet people, and you'll see more later, kind of the step-by-step breakdown of what we do. But a lot of times we'll kind of work with people who have hoarding and acquiring behaviors, and if they are up to working with us, we can sometimes help them with cleaning. We do kind of short-term case management, which can include counseling. As I said, kind of like going through items, processing items with people. Yeah, so that's pretty much our experience with hoarding and acquiring. Scott, if you have anything to add on to that as well.
Oh, just let me reach out to Leah. Leah, could we get some support with the chat? It looks like it is disabled.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just updated it. So if you want to try and use that function, hopefully it will work now. If not, I'll let you guys know.
Okay, yeah. I see. Yeah, I see, Scott, you put in your grandfather grew up during the Depression, using reused old nails and building supplies. So maybe hanging on to items that he didn't have during the Depression and holding on to those later into his life. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think too with many times as we see with our job as well, many times people could be hiding the hoarding until they're at a point where they're in great need. Much again
Hmm.
like my grandfather working with the elderly. They've been processing through a lot of items. They've been getting a lot and getting through them a lot. But when something happens in life now, they've slowed down and the clutter just acquires and sits. I'm looking forward to see what else people put in the chat.
Okay, yeah, we have here from Mary Bear used to do home visits where people were struggling with hoarding, there to support children, adolescents with school attendance. Often the hoarding factor was a risk. Yeah, that can definitely be something that can affect children and adolescents, especially people who maybe need more routine. We see that sometimes that clutter in the home can kind of be a factor that can impact people. Definitely. My grandma held on to tons and tons of crafting and sewing supplies. Yeah, require years worth of presents for friends and family that didn't always make it under the Christmas tree, just kind of accumulated over time. Hmm. Okay, yeah, and we're also seeing that's often accompanied by other mental health issues, which can be very overwhelming. Yeah, that's a great point, and also something that we'll kind of get more into as we talk is the other conditions or mental health issues that could be going alongside hoarding behaviors. And great grandpa was fairly well off, but would keep food in the fridge and pantry. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that's making me think. When we were transitioning my grandfather to his senior living, my dad was helping him clean out, and he was going through his the pantry, and he had vitamins, so
Hmm.
many vitamins. And my dad was found a bottle. Can't remember exactly what it was, but it was expired by like 6 months. And my dad throws it in the trash, and my grandfather walks by. He looks in the trash, grabs it, picks it up, goes, "Son, do you have no sense?"
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing a lot here. Older individuals, I think we're seeing as our society, as we have more aging individuals, we're seeing hoarding is becoming more common. Yeah, I see here a question was put in, is there an age where hoarding is more common? Seems everyone has stories about elderly hoarding, and that's definitely true with age. It becomes more common as someone ages, and there's a lot of factors for that we're going to get into. Part of that is cognitive factors. Maybe the behaviors haven't changed, but their ability to keep up with the items have changed. So it could be, like I said, cognitive factors, just a wide variety of things. And we'll get more into that as well. But yeah, these are great examples. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And it's good to know kind of what y'all's experience is. So this can feel bit more humanistic, talking about we're here to provide tips and services that may help y'all in y'all's own lives and help y'all when y'all are interacting with others as well. Okay. Okay, so I think we can go ahead and go to the next slide.
Yeah,
Okay, so yeah, to
and
get into, or
I
go
was gonna
ahead.
say right before you start, I just have a stat from the this is from the Committee on Aging, the U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging from 2024, but about 6% of senior citizens slash elderly are navigating hoarding disorder compared to general population, which is at, oh gosh, where's the number? Roughly 2% of general population. So yeah, we are seeing that there is a higher instance of hoarding with our senior citizens.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so let's get more into kind of what hoarding is. So here, looking at hoarding disorder, and a good note for this whole presentation, we're not technically just talking about hoarding disorder. I can't diagnose, Scott and I don't diagnose our clients. We're definitely, this isn't information for y'all to go out and diagnose people, but it's just helpful information to be able to go and recognize hoarding behaviors, and what maybe it's signs of a diagnosis and seeing a doctor, and we'll kind of get more into what that process looks like a little bit later as well. But it's also just to kind of understand using the criteria and the diagnosis just to understand what the behaviors look like and maybe understand why they form. And so, hoarding disorder in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is a book that's widely used by therapists, clinicians, usually to diagnose for mental health disorders. It characterizes hoarding disorder with three core features, and that's difficulty discarding possessions, an accumulation of excessive clutter, and compulsive acquiring of items. So these features may look different for everyone. Some people may have more of the clutter, but maybe they don't really have a problem with acquiring items. Maybe it's items they've just had for a long time and they have more of the trouble with discarding and clutter or organization. So this it's just important to know that it can look different for everyone, but these are generally the three main features of hoarding disorder. And it's also important to note that hoarding disorder, it's more than just clutter. I know from the outside looking in, a lot of times when we see hoarding, we just think about a lot of stuff, a lot of clutter, but there's also kind of an internal aspect of that and also kind of a safety aspect of that. It's very disruptive for an individual's emotional functioning, social functioning. If you think of, if you have a lot of clutter in your home, maybe not letting people come visit the home as often, maybe not leaving your home as often, that can have a big impact on your social functioning. Physical safety, especially the risk of tripping over items, that could be, and for people who maybe are more at risk to tripping, that can be a big physical safety. We also work a lot with clearing pathways, clearing entrances and exits of houses, because that could also be a fire risk. And with home integrity, that can get into that as well. Having a lot of paper, cardboard, that's a fire risk, including having, maybe mold is developing, maybe there's rodents, insects that develop. It can be a big factor towards home integrity in the long run. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and so a few more contributing factors, kind of to break down, especially what can kind of lead to hoarding behaviors. One part of that is kind of the cognitive aspect. I talked about this a little bit earlier with aging, how our cognitive abilities naturally decline with age. And also, there's a lot of other reasons that cognitive abilities may be impaired, may be declining, and these can affect your decision making. Maybe you're deciding to keep or give away an item, or even just deciding when to start cleaning items. That can be impaired. Organizational challenges, knowing how to organize items, executive functioning, like I said, knowing deciding when to start cleaning. Sometimes that can be a real struggle, just the starting aspect. And when we think of other disorders, other conditions that could also be playing a role, I think of ADHD, which can have a big impact on executive functioning. And so that could lead to hoarding behaviors, but the underlying aspect of it is these other cognitive factors. There's also emotional and psychological factors. This includes maladaptive beliefs around possessions. These beliefs include, we saw a lot earlier, people were saying that they have grandparents or parents who maybe hold on to a lot of items. And there could be a belief that this item is going to be very useful. Maybe there was a time in their life where they didn't have it. And now, even though it maybe isn't useful, you can talk to them and find out they haven't used it for years, but they believe it's going to be very useful. And this is a very adaptive behavior. And it's important to note that with hoarding behaviors, there is some wisdom behind it. Especially, people may have gone through, like going through the Great Depression where you didn't have many things. They've adapted their behaviors to hold on to things and save them in case something like that happens again, because it's happened before, in someone's mind, it's not so far off that it may happen again. So there are some maladaptive beliefs that could form, and also relying on items for emotional regulation. We also see trauma, attachment, and motivation can also often be a big reason for hoarding behavior starting. A history of trauma or instability. Like I said, if someone, experienced the Great Depression, that could lead to behaviors forming, attachment disruptions. We see early on in life, maybe if someone, was maybe moving households often, or maybe they were being moved from caregivers often. That can result in attachment disruptions that can lead to hoarding and acquiring behaviors. And then there's also just having a lack of motivation to change. This can be for a lot of reasons. This can be because of maybe they have a major depressive disorder. Maybe there's something else going on that they just don't have much motivation in their current state to change their behaviors or to change their environment. And that's something that Scott and I spend a lot of time working with our clients on, of understanding where they are currently on their motivation to change, and maybe just talking with them through that and understanding that better. And then, of course, there's also environmental and social factors, such as inadequate living situations, socioeconomic factors, and isolation from others. It's important to note the kind of economic factors that are often at play with hoarding behaviors. If you think about, there's a lot of homes where Scott and I will go to, and there is a lot of clutter, there's a lot of items, but it's also clean, it's well taken care of. And if you think about it, maybe someone who could afford a bigger house could afford storage units. This wouldn't be considered hoarding behaviors for them because they wouldn't have a clutter. But because maybe someone can't afford that and they do want to keep all these items, it does look more like hoarding behaviors because there is a clutter and more risk factors to it. So you also want to keep in mind just the economic factors that there are. We can go to the next slide. Okay, yeah, so that's kind of the rundown of what hoarding is, what it looks like, the reasons for it. And now we can look more into what y'all can look out for in y'all's loved ones, neighbors, if there's someone you are concerned for, if there's someone you're thinking of reaching out to. These are kind of some base level signs that you can look out for. First one is kind of more obvious. It's excessive clutter in or around the home. And this includes multiple of one item, unused items, broken or damaged items. And this makes me think of something Scott and I will do usually when we're first talking with clients. We'll kind of talk about the items and we'll try to set criteria for what are the items they want to keep and what are the items that can go. And usually where we start with that criteria is, okay, so if you have multiple of this item, maybe you haven't used this item in so many months or so many years, or this item is broken or damaged. That's usually the criteria we'll start with to kind of help them start going through and processing these items. But it's usually that's something you kind of start to see if someone is exhibiting hoarding behaviors. There's also the excessive acquisition of items. So going to the store and buying a lot of items, even though they don't have the space for it, maybe they already have multiple of those items. And also collecting items. This could look like going to a lot of places where there's a lot of free items. And even if they don't have the space for it, collecting free items, maybe if there's something that's been put out on the street, going and collecting those items. Just excessive acquisition of items. We also have difficulty discarding, organizing these possessions, having a difficulty processing them, and identifying if they should be given away or not. That can definitely be a big problem. Blocked walkways or doorways, like we talked about. This is when it maybe is starting to look more severe. And if people are not able to walk through their home safely, if they aren't able to leave through the entrances, exits safely, that can definitely be a big warning sign. And then more of the kind of cognitive, maybe you haven't been into someone's home factors to look out for. One is struggling to stay focused or make decisions. Now, of course, this doesn't automatically lead to, oh, they must have hoarding behaviors, but it could be a factor, like I was talking about, that cognitive decline can definitely lead to hoarding behaviors. And so if someone's having more and more trouble staying focused, making decisions, that could be a factor. Not letting others come to the home, maybe keeping others away from the home. Again, this isn't a definite hoarding sign, but it could be a reason for it, especially maybe if someone used to let people in their home and used to invite people a lot of times, and now suddenly they aren't. Maybe that's something to inquire about and have a conversation about. Staying home more, isolating from others, that could also be another sign, and also change in usual hygiene levels. Now, this one's important to be sensitive about. I know, like hygiene levels, that can be a sensitive topic for people. Mostly what we're talking about here is if there either is a drastic decline in hygiene levels. Scott and I, we talk a lot about establishing what we call a baseline. And so, what that means is when we meet someone, usually the first times we're meeting with them, we're kind of understanding what is their normal, what is their baseline, because we're trying to meet people where they're at. We're not trying to make our own assumptions with how they should be presenting. We're just establishing where they usually present so that if there is a change, we can kind of inquire into what that maybe is for, what that means. So a change in hygiene levels could definitely maybe be a sign and maybe could be something to inquire about. We can go to the next slide. Okay. Yeah, so this is a pretty interesting tool that Scott and I have found. And it's actually a diagnostic tool for hoarding disorder. Of course, we don't use it to diagnose, but it can also be really helpful just with understanding kind of where people are at, where people maybe want to be with their home environment, especially if we haven't seen the home. It can help us to have a good idea, and we can go through it as well. So as you can see, one is kind of it's a very clean, non-cluttered environment. So everything kind of looks like it has a place, nothing looks out of place. And then there's just a range as you go through to nine. Nine is clearly a very severely cluttered environment. Maybe a huge fire risk. There's no walkways, there's no kind of area for egress. You see the window is fully covered. That could be a fire hazard if someone needs to maybe escape because of a fire. So that's kind of the most extreme area. So a lot of times what they would consider for hoarding disorder, kind of the factor they consider is around four. And of course, that's not saying if your house looks like around four that you have hoarding disorder. That's just maybe when the conversation starts that people may start looking into it, just because that's when we start to see that walkways are being covered. You can see that the couch maybe can't be used. So the room isn't functioning for how it was maybe meant to be functioning for. You maybe can't, when you get to the point where you can't sit on your couch, you can't use your TV, you can't use your table, then maybe there's starting to be some hoarding behavior, some clutter in the home. That's something to address. So that's something we'll usually kind of go over with clients, and it's something to use just to kind of understand where you're at and as well as where you want to be, because also we try not to assume that everyone wants to be at a one, because I don't think that's realistic. Some clients maybe want to be at a two or a three, maybe they're at like a six and they want to be at a three, and that's really good to understand because then we know and we can help them work towards that. We can go to the next slide.
And Kristen, if I may just add an idea, something in like the mental health profession and behavior health is the idea of insight, right? You can just think about ourselves, right? Is there something that we may need to work on, but we could have, or people something that people may critique us on, but we're not very well aware of it? That would be our insight. And across the mental health and behavior health field, That's part of the learning process is helping clients, right, and individuals seeking help to build their insight into the behaviors, actions, or thought patterns that they want to change and or improve. So it's not uncommon when we're doing these assessment tools that clients may be at one place that if we observe it could look different. We've been in situations where
Mhm.
they think it's worse than we see it. They'll have a higher number rating than what we actively observe. Or as we work with, or the opposite end, where they'll say it's lower than what we observe. But as we work with them, and they're building their insight, that they're when they retake the assessment, their number will change to better align to how others would perceive it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, that has happened with clients where we've retaken the assessment and the number has actually been higher while we've been working with them. And it's like, well, I've been working on these strategies that I feel like they're helping. Well, maybe it's not about like the strategies, but just about the insight, like Scott was saying. That's a really good point. Okay. So what we do. So this is kind of this is what Scott and I will do usually on a daily basis with our clients. We try to meet about weekly with our clients who are higher need, and then usually we go off of just the needs of clients. Sometimes we'll meet every other week, once a month. It really just depends on their needs and what we're able to do. So first, what we'll do when we go out to meet with a client, we'll conduct a needs and strengths assessment. So a lot of times what this looks like, I believe it's called the ANSA, which is the ANSA Assessment of Needs and Strengths. I don't know the full acronym, but it's this needs and strengths assessment. And we'll just go over maybe what their goals are, just so we can all have a good understanding. And also focusing on strengths is a very important aspect of that. Often if you're only focusing on the barriers or maybe what we see as areas where they're not so strong in, then that's not going to be very helpful in the long run. What's going to be helpful is looking at the strengths and helping them to either recognize them and use them because they already have them, or maybe develop them, or maybe those strengths are even community, families, and bringing in those communities and families as well. So it's good just to conduct this assessment and have a good understanding of the client's life and just kind of what's going on. And then we also guide through the code violation process. As I said, we work with the code department. That's where we get most of our referrals. And we are not code inspectors, but we can help to kind of just like go through the process, help inform our clients on maybe what code might be looking for. Again, we don't know exactly, but we can help in some ways and just guide through that process the best we can. We can help dispose of items. This is definitely a very interesting part of the job. A lot of times we'll just work with clients. We'll just start cleaning with clients, and we have safety gloves, we have safety shoes for it, and we'll go and we'll help clean. And Scott has the city pickup truck that we take, and we'll just fill up a truckload, and we try to fill up a truckload every time we meet with clients. And this can be really helpful. Just taking the time to work with clients to process through the items and having a dedicated place and a dedicated time where they know, okay, at this time I can take these items and put them in the truck and we'll dispose of them. That can be very helpful for people just to know that they have that service. We also conduct short-term case management services. This can look different according to the wants and needs of a client. Sometimes this is counseling sessions. We do kind of short-term counseling sessions. I'm currently in the clinical program for my master's program in social work. And Scott, he has some experience with counseling as well. And so we'll do some just kind of sit down counseling services at times where we'll use motivational interviewing, and we'll use some kind of cognitive behavioral techniques to kind of just work through with people on their hoarding behaviors. And it can also just look like, though, just kind of check-ins, just kind of helping connect to family and community members. Like I said before, we do, that's a big strength is community and family members. And something Scott and I talk a lot is how it seems like cases where we are able to get community and family involved. Those are usually the cases where our clients do the best and have the most impact because community and families all those can have those are more involved in the person's life, and they can have a much bigger impact than just me and Scott in our pickup truck, once a week. Just like being able to engage in those is that's a very big strength and something we try to encourage. We also provide resource referrals and home repair applications. So if they are interested in other outside mental health resources, we'll try to find something that's within their budget. We'll try to give them different links, resources for outside counseling. Home repair applications is something we try to help with a lot. Sometimes we'll sit down with people if they're interested in a home repair application through the city. We'll sit down with them and we'll just like we can fill it out with them. We can send them the links, whatever they are wanting to do with us. We will try to help with that as well. And then, of course, we advocate for the client, either whether that's with the code violation process, whether that's through BSC hearings, in any way that we are able to, we can try and advocate for the client, especially if they are working with us and we are meeting with them weekly. There is some change happening. We are able to tell code inspectors, we've been working with them. They are taking these steps towards change, even if it does feel slow. It can be really big for the client, even if it feels slow for us. So we try to advocate for our clients the best we can. We can go to the next slide. Okay, yeah. So that's a bit of what we do. And now we can look more into what y'all can do. And so this is kind of just a general basis of just things to keep in mind when working with someone who has hoarding and acquiring behaviors. The first thing is approach with compassion and empathy. It's important, like I said before, to recognize the person's lived experience, especially with their hoarding and acquiring behaviors. So, like I said, a lot of times this is an adaptive behavior, and it was something to either protect them, keep them safe, or it's something that maybe they didn't have these items before. And so their brain or themselves have adapted to bring these items and to keep themselves safe. And that's something to really acknowledge and to see the wisdom in and to understand where they're coming from. And a lot of times maybe a conversation should just start there. Just start, hey, so why are where did this come from? Why do you feel the need to keep these items? Not out of judgment, but out of genuine curiosity, just to get a better understanding of where people are coming from. And that can be really helpful going forward and just show people that you are here for their best interest and you're not here to judge, you're here to understand. And going forward, any steps you may take or they may take, it may be better now that y'all have had that relationship. The next thing is working alongside the individual to organize or dispose of items at their discretion. The part we want to emphasize is working alongside them and then doing it at their discretion. It can be very distressing for someone who has accumulated these items for someone to then come in and just start either just going through them and throwing them away without their consent and without their say so. I mean, imagine, you're in your own home and someone comes and starts throwing your items away. That would be very distressing, confusing. So it's important to talk with the person, work alongside them, go through each item with them, and they have the final say of which items go, which items stay. Sometimes it's helpful to make that criteria, like I said before, of like, okay, so like which items do you want to stay? Items that you've used within the past year, items you've used within the past 5 years. If it's broken, can it go? Sitting down, making that criteria so that they can put in their input. And then as y'all go along, those are the kinds of conversations y'all can be having to process these items. Um, it could also be important to encourage them to talk to a doctor or a therapist about their behaviors. Like I said, we're not here to diagnose, and this isn't, this isn't for y'all to diagnose people. But maybe if it is something that is more severe, or maybe there's underlying issues, there could be health issues playing a role into this. There could be mental health issues. If you see something like that, definitely encourage them to talk to a professional about it so they can try to get those needs met. And if you need to report to local authorities if you observe possible safety issues, this could include the Austin Code Enforcement, Austin Fire Department, Austin Animal Control. Animal control is interesting. We see people don't only hoard items, they can also hoard animals. And so there could be, maybe up to 20, 30 animals in someone's house. And this is something that Austin Animal Control deals with and they know how to deal with. And so reporting that to them could be a good idea. And then report to the Department of Protective Services if you believe the individual is having trouble taking care of themselves. This is something, so as social workers, me and Scott are mandated reporters. So if we see signs of neglect, either for themselves or from a caretaker, if we see signs of exploitation, signs of harm, then those are things that we need to report. And so we will report if it's children involved, there's the Department of Child Protective Services. If it's adults, there's the Department of Adult Protective Services. And so you are able to go onto their website and file anonymous reports. You can file reports, I believe, like with your name, you can call or do through the website. But yeah, this is if you believe the individual maybe is having a lot of trouble taking care of themselves, if you believe they are being exploited, or if you believe that there's just any danger towards that individual, it may be a good idea to report to them just to have more care for them from other services. And then the other part is just don't remove any items that aren't dangerous without their consent. This goes back to following, their lead, following their discretion. We just really want to highlight that because again, it can be very distressing to have your items removed. Of course, sometimes there are items that are really dangerous, and especially if you're close to the individual, maybe you're a family member and you see that there's a dangerous item that poses a risk to their life, or maybe they're a fall risk. It's definitely like we understand we all have different relationships with people, and maybe moving those items or getting rid of those items for their safety. But if it's not dangerous, we definitely recommend just taking steps to talk with them first and to have a conversation before removing any items. We can go to the next slide.
And then, Kristen, we got a question. I know you started to answer some of it, but what safety issues are associated with hoarding that should be reported?
Yeah, so safety issues associated, that's a good question. I know, especially fall risks, if you hear that someone has fallen in their home, and isn't taking steps to, clean around that area, that could be definitely a safety issue. There's if they aren't able to exit from their home or walk through their home safely, that's definitely a safety issue. Scott, yeah, do you have any more that you can think of?
Yeah, I think that if there is an emergency, right, we're going to call the fire department, the police, or EMS. So if there was something that would make it difficult for those agencies to do their job, right, blocked doors, windows, if there's not like a pathway all the way through the home. Yeah, signs of self-neglect again, like you were saying, if the way that they're living is now causing them to in a sense harm themselves, that would be a good sign to notify like an adult protective services. Agencies such as adult protective services do have a budget for doing cleanouts. Now that those cleanouts aren't always paired with like psychological or intense behavioral mental health interventions, but at the very least it can remediate the immediate crisis, while hopefully those other things are still being worked on. Extreme pests, right? We'd say bed bugs, fleas, roaches, and rodents. Those would be another good sign to notify, again, Adult Protective Services.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for pointing out that question in the chat, Scott. Okay, so now we have more in-depth kind of tips. So before we kind of had general what to do's, this is just some tips if you are reaching out to someone and helping them in any way. This is just some tips to keep in mind. First is building a trusting relationship. Like I said, understanding someone's lived experience, just starting a conversation, that can go a long way for building a relationship with someone. And relationships can go a long way for change. Sometimes, like we have clients who maybe we're not even, doing the cleaning aspect of it, but we're just talking with them, building relationships with them. And that's usually kind of the number one driver for some of these changes, is just having someone to talk to, having someone to talk about their behaviors without judgment, and to go into maybe why are these behaviors happening, and just understand more about themselves. That can have play a really big role in things, without even having to go into a house and start cleaning. So that's always kind of the first step of any kind of process when we go in with clients, is just building that relationship and working to understanding them. And part of that is putting yourself in their shoes, again, kind of understanding their lived experience, understanding that a lot of these behaviors, they could form in any of us, especially when you think of cognitive decline, mental health issues. Those are things that can impact anyone. And so it's good to understand that these things, try not to alienate someone, and understand that we could all at some point be in their shoes in different situations, and just try to understand people through that lens. Matching the person's language. This is definitely an important part, and something we talk about is there's person first language, there's identity first language. So a lot of times what we'll say, instead of saying, calling someone a hoarder, or saying like, oh, they hoard, then it may be more appropriate to say, oh, that person has hoarding behaviors, or that person hoards. But with that said, it's also good to understand what the person uses and match their language. Because just because maybe we think something is more appropriate, that, what the person prefers would outweigh that in the end, just because we want to match their language about themselves, and what they use to understand themselves is the best use. I think a good example of this is with one of our clients. We do something called building a safety plan. And so this can look like, oh, so if this, and this happens, then maybe this is when we start saying, okay, I need to take more drastic measures, either with my mental health, either with getting community and family involved. This would be a safety plan. But for with one client, they didn't really like the words of safety plan, so they wanted to use backsliding plan. So they know that when they're backsliding, this isn't technically language that I would like go to a client and say, this is, your backsliding plan, and have them use. But if a client is to refer this word to me, like this client did, then yeah, we would call it their backsliding plan. And that's how we would go going forward talking about the language. Next with language is just using encouraging language, being encouraging and affirming when you can. This also kind of goes hand in hand with the next one of highlighting strengths. You want to affirm strengths and what someone is doing well. You want to focus on that. And you want to try not to focus on the negatives and using discouraging language, because when you think about it, that's usually not going to be motivating for someone. That's not going to be helpful in the end for someone. If you go to someone and just say, oh, this is a mess, like, why aren't you cleaning this? That's not going to be helpful for anyone. That's just going to bring a lot of shame, and maybe even causing someone shutting down and not wanting to talk with you further. So it's a lot more useful just to use encouraging language, strength-based language, and recognize changes. Even if maybe to you they seem like a small change, recognize those. Recognize how much work it was put into that, and recognize, especially when you think of timeline for us, maybe it seems slow, but think about how long people have been using these behaviors. Think about how long maybe a house has looked the way it has. And this change may seem slow to some people, but it's really quick when you think about it in the timeline of how long this has been going on. So try to recognize that, try to understand that, and highlight that when talking with someone. Also offer the opportunity to discuss the why. This is what we've talked a lot about, of understanding someone's lived experience, understanding why someone has developed these behaviors. Maybe where did they find strength and positivity in it in the past? How has it helped them in the past? And that can help lead to the conversation of maybe how it's not helping them anymore, but just recognizing how it has helped can be really helpful. Helping to make a plan. There's a lot of different ways this can look like. I've talked before about like setting the criteria. Another plan could look like there's the 4 box method. And the way this works is maybe either once a week, once a day, whatever the person prefers, setting out 4 boxes. And the goal by, let's say the goal by the end of the week is to fill each box. And one is a trash box, one is a recycle box, one is a giveaway box, and one is a keep box. And the goal is to fill every single box just to the brim and by the end of the week. And so that could be a really good plan. And it helps people to know they don't have to give away everything. They can go through their items, find what's important. We also see a lot of times that our clients do really care about what happens to their items, whether they're recycled or whether they're thrown away. And we try to really accommodate that of whether they're recycled, thrown away. We can't usually give away items just in case it may break. You know, we're traveling in a pickup truck, but some people do really prefer that these items are maybe given to a Goodwill or given to someone else so that they can continue, the item can continue living its life in some other way. So that's a good way to kind of just like work with someone, make a plan, and have a sustainable thing throughout the week to work towards. And then the next point is understanding that this is a process. Sometimes it feels like it's going slow, but it definitely, like, there's a lot behind it. There's a lot going on. And so it's good to understand that this is a process. And a lot of times it starts with just building the motivation to change. It starts with building, understanding thought processes. And this may not look like physical change, especially when we're thinking about an environment or space, but there's a lot of change going on for a person during this time. And so just understanding that and understanding what this process is. And this last point is keeping your focus. And I think this is very important, especially if you are helping to clean or going into environments, because there can be a lot of factors in these environments. There could be rodents, there could be, maybe there's nails, there's something you could step on, there's, hazardous materials. Of course, we are not telling anyone to go into these spaces if you don't want to. That is not what this is for. This is just in case you do offer that, if that's something you are comfortable with. Just keep your focus, kind of understand safety does come first. And so if you're ever uncomfortable, always step out if you're uncomfortable. Of course, try to do so in a respectful way, especially if you're in someone's home. But yeah, keeping your focus, understanding that there could be some safety hazards, and prioritizing your safety and the other person's safety is always comes first. We can go to the next slide. Okay, next we have the don'ts. So before we had the do's, and this is more of kind of the don'ts. A lot of it is kind of repeats of what we talked before, but don't try to address quickly. Again, this can be a slow process. Addressing quickly can be very distressing for someone going through and taking items before they've processed and decided to give away that item. That can be very distressing. So try to go slower, try to go at their pace if you're able to. Don't rush to discuss decluttering. Like I said, it's good to prioritize the relationship and the why first, and then go to decluttering if they're ready for that. Don't use judgmental language like we talked before. Try to use strength-based language. Don't use words that devalue or negatively judge possessions. We've talked about this a bit more before. Don't let your nonverbal expressions say what you're thinking. This can be difficult in some instances, especially like there's been instances where we've seen rats or we've seen bugs. I've had an instance where a cockroach was on my shoulder and I had to get it off. So we are all human, and I'm not saying, you can't, have your expressions. You definitely can. It's also good to remember to be respectful when you're in someone's safe space or in someone's home. Try not to shame people. But of course, we are all human, and it's okay to have some expressions. But just try to be mindful as well. Um, and try to avoid making suggestions about their belongings. Let them kind of suggest what they want to happen with their belongings. Don't try to persuade or argue with people. If you think about like that's not going to be motivating for a person to continue trying to get rid of items if you are arguing with them and kind of like setting a barrier between them. and don't touch belongings without explicit permission. Like we said before, let them be the driver of it, threaten to put fixed timescales or do large scale interventions. Of course, sometimes large scale interventions do happen. Like we said, with cleanouts with adult protective services, that's a very large scale intervention that doesn't have a lot of a mental health component to it and a counseling component. We try to avoid that though. Of course, sometimes it is necessary for safety, but we do try to avoid that just for someone's own mental health and to try and avoid distressing events. Um, Okay, yeah, now we have more of an activity. Scott, if you would like to lead more of this activity section.
Sure. So I feel like a lot of people here have experiences with hoarding, cluttering, and acquiring, or with loved ones that are navigating that from some of the comments we've seen. So we just have this little activity. It doesn't have to be a postcard, but what we're going to do is this is a template. Let's say that there's a friend, family member, grandparent, I don't know, a neighbor who you think could be navigating hoarding or is. We're just going to practice this template as something that you can do. Now, it could be a postcard, a phone call, just like so that we have kind of our thoughts together. But the gist of it is, as it says here, right? Hi, and then you insert the name. It's, and then you put your name, like, and I'm your, and you can obviously edit this depending on like if you know the person well or not. It's me, it's your son, your daughter, your granddaughter, or your neighbor, right? I wanted to reach out because I care about you and how you're doing. I know that having a lot of belongings in your space can be really personal and sometimes difficult thing to talk about. And I want you to know there's no judgment here. If you ever feel open to it, I'd be glad to listen and support you in whatever way feels comfortable for you. There's no pressure, just someone nearby who's willing to take things at your pace. If you'd like to talk, you can reach out to me at, and then there's the information. I was hoping that if people feel comfortable, we can take, I know we're running low on time. Maybe someone could post one in the chat how they think they would do it. Or if someone would like to practice saying one out loud. Um, let's go ahead and take a couple minutes and just practice because I'm sure some of y'all are here because you're thinking about a particular loved one that you want to try to help in some way. And obviously, we know that there's ways for intervention, such as like our program, but most lasting change will happen when it can be done with community, with loved ones, um, right, and not from a systems, right, which is what we are, is a city system, a governmental agency.
Yeah, and just to note, of course, your card doesn't have to be word for word looking like this. Feel free to customize it and change it however you feel would be helpful. We just wanted to put this template in to kind of show maybe an example of how to go about it and how to reach out to someone. But feel free to customize it as much as you'd like.
And we have it in the chat as well if you'd like to copy and paste it. And I know we want to leave time for Q&A, but I believe we had, was it one or two more slides? We were wondering about like a role play, if anyone here would feel comfortable doing that. And I don't know, do we have hand raise feature? Does anyone have a loved one that they do want to reach out to and they would maybe want to practice um, kind of reading this postcard or however they would formulate in a phone call manner or we could just do it here together, like as a group, or if the chat's live. And we can go to the next slide as well. Okay, I'll leave another minute, either drop in hand raise or in chat or in the Q&A if anyone would like to practice a role play. Okay. Now we do have some resources here, and we'll go ahead and drop these in the chat. First thing is Austin Resource Recovery does on-demand bulk pickup. I believe you get about three a year. But we'll put these links here. Um, oh yes, and I see some people are jumping off. Beth, yeah, we'll post our emails. Let's also drop those in the chat. We'll drop the toolkits and our emails in the chat if y'all ever want to reach out to us. Kristen, go ahead and add yours.
I
And
was
a
gonna
couple things we
say,
have here. Oh, sorry, go
I
ahead,
was gonna
Leah.
say, yeah, bear with me. I'm putting him in right now. So 1 second, and just adding him to the chat right now. So, um, but yes, continue.
Okay. Yeah, we also have links to Integral Care. They're like the number one Medicare, Medicaid provider for mental health and behavioral health services in the county. Now, if you or your loved one has other insurances, then you know that there's a usually those insurance companies will have like a find a service or find a provider features that can be good for finding your mental behavior health resources. Also, the International OCD Foundation has kind of resources depending on if you're a family member, loved one, neighbor, or if you're a community responder. And then we have this toolkit, which where we got the postcard idea from. We'll drop the toolkits in the chat. If you have to jump off real quick, you can always email us. And we want to open up the floor too for some questions and answers, depending on how much time we have for everyone.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say I can multitask. I was gonna say we have
Thank you, Leah.
about 5 minutes. I'm gonna keep doing this, but if you do have questions, there were a couple that I saw in earlier. I think a couple of them were questioned or were answered, but one was, is there an age that's more common for hoarding? And then is fear the underlying driver of the behavior? So those are two that I saw earlier that popped up. And so just FYI, that if that's something you guys want to talk about, if somebody else is here and they want to raise their hand, they are welcome to.
Yeah, and I'll follow up kind of again on that the age aspect of it. But and I put in the chat there was this Senate report from the Committee on Aging, right? Because believe it or not, when we were looking for resources, there were a lot of hoarding toolkits and research kind of done in the UK, but the US it's still underreported, and we have inadequate data, and that's something that actually the Committee on Aging talks about. We've not really been tracking this well enough. Or maybe we've been also been tracking it through different like definers. Self-neglect is probably the main adult protective service report that qualifies for this. And that's something when we meet with the client, we think we have to do a adult protective service report. It's always self-neglect. But that gets interesting because when you speak to a person, like, because any of us could be hoarding, it's not like there's an explicit cognitive or like intellectual need there, right? So that's why it could be kind of hard for people to know how to report it and why it's being underreported. But again, 2% of the general population hoards, and if you're considered 65 or older, that number is 6%. And then when we consider that right now, like the largest population is our aging population in our country, right? So the proportion of Americans who are 65 and older is increasing from 16%. This was 16% back in 2019 to 25% in 2060. So it's just going to be more common if this kind of trend continues. So definitely, it seems to be um, elderly, right, and senior citizens that are hoarding at a higher rate than the general population. And just the reason for that is kind of, the executive functioning, neurobiology, all these things that Kristen was saying, family history, memory, physical health, mental health, and trauma, right? So we get a lot more questions. And then the other question was about fear, right? And it's Kristen was saying, right, trauma plays a big role in kind of like we could have a predisposition to hoarding. It could be a biological or genetic thing already. Then you pair that with some adverse experiences, maybe adverse experiences in childhood. fire, like Kristen was saying, moving a lot. But think about if you have a fire when you're 8 years old, you lose everything that's important to you. That could be kind of the starter of why we're holding on to things going forward. We've seen situations, and some people put in that chat too, growing up working class or in poverty, that when they get older, it's like now they can have all the things they never wanted to have. I worked with a client who grew up in a small, like studio apartment in Mexico with her family of eight. And when she became an adult, she collected toys for children, and every year would do a trip back to Mexico to her hometown to give toys to children. And that was going great until the pandemic happened, which this all reminds me of someone else said about like the fears of supply chain lines. Um, Pandemic happened, she couldn't get over there. She got a little bit older, and now all the items just sit, right? um, People navigating intimate partner violence or domestic violence. We've seen situations where an abusive spouse would destroy all the items in the home. And I'm actually thinking this. Someone in the chat put like a family member kept a Christmas tree. I remember working with a client, and they said that their husband would destroy the holiday arrangements every year in their like alcoholic anger, right? And so the first year she got out of that situation, she was going to have that Christmas tree up year round, right? And kind of how Chris was saying, the wisdom in our clients and people navigating hoarding, right? Like that was a sign to heal her, to soothe her. That was a sign of liberation from what she went through. And it probably was a protective and supportive factor for many years of her life until, no item ever went up, right? All the items stayed out year round.
So
Oh.
we are having a fabulous discussion, but it's 12 o'clock. That hour went quickly. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. There's a QR code and that is an engagement survey for how we did today, and then another one that shows our other series, the public input info series. So if you have any feedback for us, please use those. And again, it was a wonderful session today. We'll have it recorded and it will be up on the website in about a week. But it'll have the presentation from today, and it'll also have the recording and then the presentation today. So you can share that with your fellow curious people. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon in the future.